I'm here with my dad, ladies and gentlemen, and we're just debating on, listen, I think that consistency and volume is key, whereas he's very, very perfection-based when it comes to podcasts, and it's like so interesting to see because I've done research on podcasts, and all the main ones are not perfect at all. Okay, and that's the point that I want to bring up. Joe Rogan, all these guys, they don't make perfect podcasts. You know what I'm saying, Dad? They really don't. They just sit down with a thing. I mean, Joe Rogan had marijuana with Elon Musk, and they were just having a chill out sesh. They were far away from the mic. You could barely hear them, but it's one of his best podcasts, his most reviewed podcasts ever, because perfection is very, very perspective based. But what do you think?
I disagree. I think your quality of work is a reflection on you, and it's a reflection on your guest, and you should always do your best on your podcast. Obviously, I'm not talking about you can't have perfection, especially in a live podcast. But when you are editing afterwards, or you have a chance to stop something and redo it, then you should be doing that. But anyway.
Okay. Well, yeah, that makes sense because listen, this is a podcast about starting a podcast. If I haven't actually told you that, Dad, we're going to be. That's the whole theme of this podcast episode, because I know you've started a podcast, I've started a podcast, and I know there's a lot of people that want to get their message out through the medium of podcasts.
Oh, cool.
So I would love to ask, how did you start? Where did it happen? All this stuff. So what was that trigger of, okay, let me start a podcast? I'm very interested to know.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me onto your show, Jonathan. So, I don't know if I'm a podcast expert, but I have started a podcast recently in the past 2 months. My particular podcast is about running. It's for running enthusiasts. It's not designed to be an overly technical podcast. It's more about people and fun and events and that kind of thing, whatever. So having said that, 2 months old, and it's starting to get good traction.
It's getting ridiculous traction, ladies and gentlemen. Like, he's double my views, and it's kind of ridiculous how much traction it is. But I think it's because it's just, you've got such a niche audience that it's like,
yeah,
like the people that listen to it, they completely understand what you're selling. Like, if they're into it, if they're into running, they completely understand it, and they're just like hooked. I mean, he's got people from all over the world listening to these podcasts. How many countries now? It was like
16 now.
16 countries. He's been at this for 2 months, ladies and gents. It's ridiculous. So so you're starting the podcast, right? And it starts to like expand and what's going through your mind as this is just becoming way bigger and way faster than you ever thought.
Okay, well, to be honest with you, in the beginning, I was obsessed with how I can get it to get bigger, and then now it's at the stage where, like yesterday, I had record number of views for a single day, and the day before that was also a record number of views for a single day.
Word.
So it's 2 days in a row. So now I'm obsessed with. In the beginning, I was obsessed with getting it to grow, and now I'm more concerned about trying to understand why it's having this mini explosion and why it's growing like it is, so that I can maybe replicate it, down the line, or I can continue doing the right thing. But I have to figure out what the right thing is at the moment.
That's interesting, because like you've started doing something else. Like you say, you started in the beginning and you were focused on views.
Yeah.
And then you did something else, but you don't know exactly what you did.
Well, I do. I just don't.
What did you do?
I do know what I did differently, but I'm finding it difficult to understand why such a small change could result in such a big.
And what was that change?
In viewership. Okay, so when I originally started, I had in my mind that I wasn't going to go with one of the major players. I was going to go with Spotify, which was a new and exciting platform, an international platform. And I still think it's a great platform, and I still think it is the way to go. And that was exclusively where I was going to release my podcast. Subsequent to that, I've actually discovered that as simple as it is just to register and download an app like on Spotify or any other podcast app like that, it's still a barrier to entry. And people don't want to download stuff. They don't want to spend that extra minute or two registering on Spotify. And literally, it's like a 1.5, 2 minute process. It's so simple. It's so quick. And of course, it's free. So I still don't really understand why there is such a barrier. So what I did is I found an alternative platform, which is a South African-based platform called Iona.fm. And what that is a simple click and play. So you literally, there's a link, you click on it, and the thing starts playing. And it's as simple as that. And it's almost as if I've taken down those, even though they're not real barriers, I've taken down those barriers to access, to listen to my podcast. And
just to explain that, like you're saying that when you go onto Spotify, obviously not everyone has Spotify, and so you would have to download the app in order to listen to his podcast. Now you can just find like Run FM where? How does that work?
Platform's called Iona FM. So basically you'll click on the link and it'll open up a page with your podcast interview on it, and there's a play button. And if you want to hit play, you can hit play. And if you want to download it for later, you can hit download. But it's just as simple as that. There's no registration. There's no ifs and buts. You can listen to it in low, medium, and high quality. So if you've got like a minimum data or you've got data issues, you can hit it on low quality and the thing will just play straight away. Or alternatively, you can hit the download button. So
the thing is, like, where's this link going? You're using social media, obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
Facebook.
So all right. So what I do is I use Facebook.
Okay.
So once I've uploaded my podcast to Spotify or the alternative platform, INFM, then I'll go to Facebook and I'll say new episode just uploaded, and I'll have a couple of pictures and have a little intro as to what it's about, and then I'll put links to both Spotify and the other one on the Facebook. So the Facebook's how I get the message out there to say new podcast, just new episode is just released, click and play kind of scenario. And that's how it's working.
So I know that you use Facebook ads.
Yes, I do.
So, and now I've heard that they are grossly underpriced for the amount of attention that you get. So obviously you're in the trenches with that. So let's say someone is starting a podcast. They just created a Facebook page. Do you recommend them using ads as like instantly, or do you think they need to start, creating an audience first?
Okay, so ideally I would say yes and no. I've got a mixed response from my ads. I'd say they're different kind of ads. So if you need to identify a certain kind of audience in a certain geographical area, then you can actually use Facebook just to plonk ads into a certain area or a town or a city or a location. And from that perspective, it actually works quite well.
And I just want to explain that. Sorry, guys. The reason why you put so much information into Facebook when you log in, or like when you first create an account, is because they use that for advertising. So you put in your name, or da-da-da-da-da. You put in like sometimes your street address, what you like, what you dislike, what your interests are, just all the stuff. And that is actually for ads. So you get the best ads possible on your feed. And that's when you're a content creator, like my dad, he can go into the Facebook ad system or whatever, and he can select, okay, I want people with interests on running, on cycling, on biking, and they have to be this age, and they have to be male, and and he can just do all these categories to the point where he's got his perfect target audience, and it just explodes. And that's why I think Facebook ads are grossly underpriced, because you pay like what, $30?
Yeah, look, you can just pay as little as 10 rand.
I mean, guys,
you don't always get the response that you're hoping for, but at the moment my focus has been to grow my Facebook business page. So I'm trying to get people to like and to follow it. So that has been my focus, and I must admit, every time, if I take out maybe a 10 or a 15 rand ad, as simple as that, then I usually get maybe 15 new joins, So that's, from that perspective, that's what it's turning out to me. The interesting thing about Facebook or probably any other social media is that when someone clicks on your page or likes your stuff or likes your pictures or whatever the case is, it doesn't necessarily, excuse me.
That's right.
I'll cut that out now.
That's
okay,
right.
so it doesn't necessarily translate into people going to go listen to my podcast. Yeah, so people interact with the page and they like interacting with the page, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go and listen.
That's so interesting because I've noticed that as well. Social media, podcasting, there's two different audiences entirely. Completely. Yeah. And you would think when you start, okay, I'm generating some kind of attention here so it can translate here. But actually, it's kind of becomes like a him and them scenario, or us and them, right? Where it's like you've got your social media audience and you've got your podcast audience. And it's kind of, it's bizarre, but people, it's two different mediums of entertainment.
Yes, yeah. And obviously there's a merging in the middle, but you would assume starting out that, like if 100 people like your page, then 100 people are actually going to listen to your podcast, but no, it doesn't work that way. No.
Okay, so wait, Dad, so like I said, you're getting into this podcast thing. I wanted to pick your brain. 3 deadly sins of starting a podcast. Like, what are like the 3 things of that like a no-no for you? 3 deadly sins.
Oh, okay.
Of starting a podcast.
Well, I think we touched on it in the beginning. So I'm like very, I'm quality focused. But look, I think that's probably just me. So I would say probably the biggest sin is stop procrastinating and get on and do it.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing, because it took me a long time before I eventually committed and got around to doing it. I think I probably listened to my first podcast episode 20 times before I eventually released it and edited it.
And it was trash.
And re-edited it. And in hindsight, the quality of the first one compared to what I'm putting out now is absolute garbage. Yeah. So unfortunately, I had 2 really good guests on my podcast, and let me just say that. Let me just go there as well quickly. Is that length? Duration is a big thing, yeah. So I had 2 really quality guests, and they probably carried me through it. And even though I listened to it 20, 30 times before I eventually had the guts to release it, there was still an error on a blatant error that I was supposed to have edited out that I didn't. And yeah, you live and learn. So it was a little bit. The first one was a little bit rough. It was a little bit amateur hour, but it got the ball rolling, and it generated interest. And I think that particular, even though it's 48 minutes long, which, guys, please, if you can get I've learned through trial and error now, so if you can get your podcast under half an hour, that's a good number to be at, because people...
I even cut it into 20 minutes.
Even if they're sitting in the traffic for an hour on their way to work, they do have an hour, but you know what I mean? Do they want to give you their whole hour?
And do they have the attention span to stick with what you're actually saying for an hour? Remember, the human attention span, if I can remember correctly, is about half an hour to 45 minutes max before they start drifting off. And that's like if you really got their attention. So just keep that in mind. Yeah.
So I think my 2 most popular episodes so far, if I think about it, and I'm only thinking about it now, just realizing that I think the one is 22 and the other one is 21 minutes.
21 minutes, 22. So, that's my target.
Advice is my limited experience advice would be to keep it under half an hour, if you can. And I do have an episode that's 13 minutes long, and you know what? It's getting good traction. So
I've got an episode that's 15. It's my first one. My first one was 15 minutes. It's my so with YouTube, when new people come on, you have a intro video or whatever where everyone sees that one video as soon as they open your channel, and that's my very first one. It's a 15-minute podcast. It's very to the point, and because I started Moose Meat before, I was pretty good with YouTube and talking and stuff, so it's brilliant, and that people know exactly from listening for 5, 10, 15 minutes if they're going to subscribe or not. And I think everyone needs that, and that would be my advice to people. Have a podcast episode that is 15, 10, or even 5 minutes long, introducing yourself, but like not even that, just like talking and just conveying who you are. That's the thing. That's what differentiates one podcast from the other. And especially in your own topic or whatever. The only thing, if two podcasts are next to each other and they're both talking about the same thing, the one with the better personality always wins, not the perfection. And that's why I don't think perfection is a thing. But I mean, I'm gonna play a game with you, okay, Dad? This game's called Fill in the Blank. You can't start a podcast without
Pat Flynn. Go into YouTube. Go look for Pat Flynn. Pat Flynn releases episodes every week about podcasting. He's been podcasting for years. He is my podcast guru.
I'll leave a link in the description.
He's taught me basically everything I need to know. Okay, so start from the beginning. He's got like a Pat Flynn 101, how to start a podcast, where literally he starts at the basics, like what.
That's fine.
Yeah, he'll tell you, for example, what microphone to go, how you link, how you upload, where you upload to, what Libsyn is, all those kind of questions. There's simple questions because let me tell you, in the beginning, you have no idea where to start.
Yep.
So this is the good place to start. Pat Flynn, go listen to the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, how to start a podcast episodes. And literally, you'll have a foundation. You'll know where to go from there, because without it, I would have been lost. So,
dude, Pat Flynn helped you out so much. I remember you grinding videos of Pat Flynn. Was he like bald, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, like this bald.
He's a young guy. He's still a youngish guy.
I think he was bald. I'm not sure.
So the second thing I want to say, if I can just expand on that,
okay,
is that there's a link. Pat Flynn has got a link on his videos called the podcast cheat sheet. It's a free download. So it gives you what to do when from the beginning, step 1, step 2, step whatever.
I used that.
And I used it too. And I referenced it in the beginning more than once. And let me tell you, the best thing you can do, guys, number 1, go watch Pat Flynn. Number 2, go download his podcast cheat sheet. And you will have saved yourself hundreds of hours.
Yep.
Hundreds.
Yep. So the cheat sheet is basically, it gives you step-by-step instructions from the beginning to end of how to start on the right foot with your podcast. So it gives you all these things. You buy a microphone, you and you've got all these and you have to tick all the boxes, and once you finish with the cheat sheet, you have a fully running podcast. Fully running. It's ridiculous. Okay, fill in the blank, number 2. An entertaining podcast always has...
Wow.
An entertaining podcast
podcast always has something that you're interested in.
So it's very, very perspective based.
It is content driven.
Yeah.
You know, you can't talk about nothing. So it is interest based. So if you're going to put out a podcast, just make sure you do your homework, present something that people are interested in, or go speak to someone that they are interested in and they want to hear about, someone knowledgeable or someone interesting. That would be my advice there. Yeah.
Okay, and last fill in the blank. I've never listened to a podcast with a blank.
I must admit, I've got an old car and old technology, so I've actually never listened in my car to a podcast. So that's something that I would change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. Sure. I mean, most people listen to their podcasts in their car, and I think that's something that you do have to take into consideration.
Yeah. So the beauty of a podcast is it frees your eyes to do other things.
Yeah.
So you're listening to a podcast, and you can drive, you can cook, you can clean the house, or you can do whatever it is you need to be doing.
You can have sex.
Well, I think I don't know how popular you would be, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Pat Flynn in your ears.
So that is
while you're doing your thing.
So that's the beauty of a podcast. The beauty of a podcast is that it frees up. Nothing wrong with YouTube as a medium, but YouTube demands your eyes and your full focus.
Yep.
Whereas a podcast, you can go around and do other things. You could even run. I've got a running podcast. You can go run and listen. So
that's the thing. Dad, if you could go back in time and give the Clifford that's just about to start a podcast one nugget of advice, what would you give that Clifford back in time?
Okay, so I would probably say, from my limited experience, I would say, don't limit yourself to one platform. but release on maybe 2 or 3 platforms at the same time. So I have a big resistance to. I'm not a fan of Apple products, and anyway, so that's a personal preference, and so I decided I wasn't going to release on iTunes, and I get asked all the time, when am I going to put my podcast on iTunes? So actually, the lesson here is listen to your audience, people. It's what your audience wants, not what you think they want.
Yeah, if the audience says that they're there, you got to get there. You got to figure it out. Yeah. Dad, there's the mic. It's time for the plugging time. Where can people find you? Where can people find your podcast? Go for it.
Oh, well, thanks, Jonathan. So first of all, my podcast is called Run FM. Okay, it's a running platform. It's a running podcast for runners in South Africa. It's designed to be an easygoing, non-technical kind of podcast. So it's more about the people and clubs and events and the fun and that sort of thing. It's not specifically about watts and ohms and grams. Although I have had 1 or 2 technical guests already. But yeah, the idea is I'm not trying to compete with the professors of the world. I'm just want to tell people about running. So that's my podcast. You'll find my podcast in 2 places currently. The first is on Spotify, and it's on Run FM. And the second is on a local South African platform called Iono FM, IONO.FM.
I will put the 2 links in the description, ladies and gentlemen. I'll make it easy for you.
Okay. So obviously both Spotify, of course, you can, the nice thing about you could sign up and listen to a podcast or any podcast for that matter. And the lovely thing about Spotify is, although podcasts are new to Spotify, in other words, they've only been on Spotify for around about a year. The beautiful thing is you've got 1 billion pieces of music you can listen, can go and listen to at the same time. So you're not just limited to a podcast on Spotify. You can go download music or stories or whatever the case is. So to me, it's a fantastic platform, and it gives you great analytics as well. So if you're a podcast owner, you can click into the analytics, and it gives you detail as to who's listening, what the age groups are, what their gender is, what country they're calling from, what listening from, what city they're, all sorts of analytics. Very interesting. Gives you times of day, that sort of thing. So literally, you can actually understand a lot about when to release your episode from the time of day perspective, from a day of the week perspective. Very, very interesting. So the second one is Iona FM, which is the South African platform. I see it's got lots of podcasts on it, downloaded as well as content from the SABC, so the South African Broadcasting Corporation. People download their news. I know Gareth Cliff and his Cliff Central's on there. There are also fitness and health related podcasts that you can listen to as an alternative. So that's the quick, easy click and play alternative that I found that I'm getting such great traction on, because as I said before, people they have they don't not necessarily keen to download an app kind of scenario, whereas that one they just click on the player. Interesting analytics. From a podcasting point of view, if you do own a podcast, doesn't cost you anything to save your to release on Spotify, for example. Whereas Iona FM, they do charge you a little bit of money, but it depends on the volume of your content. So if you do 5 or less podcasts a month, it's free. They don't charge you. But the moment I think it's up to 50, they'll charge you like 77 Rand a month, which of course is for nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, it's still very cheap.
Ladies and gentlemen, links in the description. Dad, it's been amazing.
Cool.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.